Trump feels as though this is somebody that he could trust, right?
Mhm.
And hopefully that's a two-way street. He feels as though Doug Collins can give him the information that he needs, and he could trust that. And he also knows that the direction that he wants will somehow, some way, kind of be implemented. Right? It is a cabinet position. This is in the executive branch. Let's
Yeah.
not forget that. The VA secretary works for the president. So that's just the way it's set up. So Doug Collins first was in the Navy for a couple years as a chaplain, active duty, got out, and then 9/11 happened, and he joined back up into the reserves. I commend that already because I think that it speaks to somebody's character, right?
It
If you
does.
already served and you got out, and then something like 9/11 happens, and you raise your hand again, there's a character thing there. And I'm all about that because it's the actions of people that we can kind of base things on, right? So I don't know a lot about Doug Collins. I did a video on him on my channel.
Mhm.
I'm sure you have, or you're going to on your channel, the CivDiv, mine, Veterans InfoTap. Um, but I did get a lot of comments about how he's a solid dude, solid representation, those types of things. For some folks that followed him knew who he was. As far as how he's going to be as the VA secretary, I think it's interesting because he's a former congressman. So
Yeah.
I think that could actually be in our benefit. Okay, if he has our if he has veterans' best interests in mind, right? And as he's trying to navigate and do things with Congress, one, he knows congressional members already, right? Now,
Mhm.
granted, when you have the executive branch, the House and the Senate, it's a different world anyway. But having somebody who understands that side, the political side, he'll know how to politic things, help get things across the aisle if needed, is an important aspect, I think. And we've seen currently what it looks like when the VA gives it to Congress. I mean, look what's happened over the last. Anybody who thinks that's what's happened with the VA over the last 4 years, if they think that's normal business, it's not, and
Yeah.
it really put a bad look on the VA. So I'm hoping that some of that can get corrected, and that's my biggest thing too. As far as the piece you talked about, Clay, with the idea of privatization of VA, I'm going to throw this out there and then I'll let you take it.
Mhm.
It will never be 100%. And I know you already mentioned that up front. It's just not. And when we talk about, the VHA is going to lose funding, and we'll dive further into that. No, they're not. Even if it's unauthorized. I mean, maybe sure for something little over here. I mean, look, the VA has done a very crappy job at budgeting and forecasting. And for 1 minute, there were $3 billion short on veterans benefits, and then guess how we ended out the year? Do you know? 5 billion surplus. So really, we didn't need the 3 billion. We're
Yeah.
actually 2 billion over. So and that's not even being talked about, right? But guess who remembers and knows? Congress, right?
Mhm.
They know. So
Especially those who passed that,
yeah,
the rush
please,
3 billion bill,
yeah,
right?
it just drives me nuts, Clay. I'm just so frustrated. Um, So all that to say is that sure, I think there'll be some cleaning out at the VA, but I mean, wasted money's wasted money, and if as long as we're not being affected, cool. I can't tell you what's in the VA, and anybody who could sit here and go, nope, the VA needs every penny they need. Well, now we're living in a crazy world. You
Yeah.
need to look into it and see. First of all, and remember, we were $5 billion over. $5 billion over. That's a lot of money. Okay. What could your state do for veterans if the federal government gave them an extra billion? Right. So, do I see an increase, an uptick in community care and all that aspects? Yes. The other thing that I could see is And in fact, this was actually mentioned in Project 2025, funny enough. Um, the idea of having shared facilities. So let's say
Yep.
that out in the middle of nowhere, there's a hospital, but that hospital isn't fully functioning well because there's not enough patients. But if you add in a VA center or like a little clinic that shares the same medical facility, has a different door for veterans with flags, right? And in we walk on the other side, whatever it is, right? You get the point. But now that's a win-win for the community in which the veterans live, all the residents, a healthier residencyhood, whatever. So I could see things like that happening. What I could keep going on and on. I'm so excited
Yeah.
about this. Go ahead.
Okay, we're going to cross into the privatizing here in a second. I do want to read two quotes from Doug Collins himself. And I should have prefaced this with this, and I'm so glad you brought that up. We are going to speak in terms of the last 4 years and the next 4 years. And just to be very clear, veterans' issues are bipartisan, and they should remain that way. In fact, the second that changes, that's when we're in trouble, right? Veterans benefits can't be good when so and so is in the office and bad when so and so is in the office. It must remain bipartisan. So we should have said that at first. I'm probably going to cut that and put it at the beginning, actually, just because, right? And then second is it's bipartisan. We're going to mention like last 4 years, next 4 years, because that's how the VA secretary position kind of runs. It's not necessarily a mention to the Biden administration and the Trump administration, just food for thought. We're just talking about the VA right now. It's bipartisan. Keep it bipartisan, because when it's not, that's when we're going to be in big trouble, right? Anyways, the quote I want to read, there's two of them from Doug Collins, and we can kind of break this down. He says, "We will fight tirelessly to streamline and cut regulations in the VA, root out corruption, and ensure every veteran receives the benefits they've earned. Together, we will make the VA work for those who fought for us. Time to deliver our veterans and give them the world-class care they deserve." So I want to break that down because I know someone's going to talk about cutting VA regulations. I do not think it is implied that that is for VA disability or VA SRD. And I'm telling you right now, the high level, high level, they're not worried, at least right now, about VA SRD, right? The schedule of rating of disabilities. And so all those changes that are coming down, these are two separate things, right? He's talking about cutting federal regulations, probably in healthcare, if I had to take a wild guess, because Doug Collins he's very focused on VA healthcare. He has been for the last 10 years. And I think we see that because the very next quote in this same article I'm reading says, "Why does a veteran have to drive 80 miles to see a doctor when they already have trouble seeing to start with?" Right? We see this a lot in the rural community. So, for instance, I am less than 10 minutes away from DC. Right? I'm in the Beltway. Traffic is absolutely insane here. When I go to the VA in DC, it's right across the Potomac. I just drive my little happy little car across the bridge, which sucks, right? Crazy enough for me, Jason, this is totally off topic. The VA is about maybe 8 miles away, and it takes me a solid 45 minutes to get there just because it's in DC, right? I go to the VA in Washington, DC, and it's a good VA, at least from my experience, and that's easy for me. Let's talk about someone who lives in where I'm from in Kentucky. You have someone who lives in Irvington, Kentucky. Um, the next civilization is Fort Knox, about an hour away. What does healthcare look like for those veterans? And trust me, there's a ton of veterans in rural communities who simply they have access to VA healthcare, meaning they're eligible. They don't have proximal access or physical access in those rural communities. And so I'm so glad you brought that up, Jason, because I do think what we're going to see, the biggest change under the Trump VA, I would argue and probably gamble some money on, right? Not that I do, is a step in the right direction, right? according to my definition, on what supplementing VA healthcare looks like with privatizing healthcare for those rural communities. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that.